This article is related to the study of self-replicating units of culture, not to be confused with mimesis. Mimetics is a theory of mental content based on an analogy with Darwinian evolution, originating from the popularization of Richard Dawkins' 1976 book The Selfish Gene. Proponents describe mimetics as an approach to evolutionary models of cultural information transfer. The mem, analogous to a gene, was conceived as a unit of culture, which is hosted in the minds of one or more individuals, and which can reproduce itself, thereby jumping from mind to mind. Thus what would otherwise be regarded as one individual influencing another to adopt a belief is seen as an ideal replicator reproducing itself in a new host. As with genetics, particularly under a Dawkinsian interpretation, a mem's success may be due to its contribution to the effectiveness of its host. Mimetics is also notable for sidestepping the traditional concern with the truth of ideas and beliefs. Instead, it is interested in their success. The Usenet newsgroup Ord Mimetics started in 1993 with peak posting years in the mid to late 1990s. The Journal of Mimetics was published electronically from 1997 to 2005. History: in his book The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins used the term mem to describe a unit of human cultural transmission analogous to the gene, arguing that replication also happens in culture, albeit in a different sense. Ted Cloak had briefly outlined a similar hypothesis in 1975, which Dawkins referenced. Cultural evolution itself is a much older topic, with a history that dates back to Darwin's era. Dawkins contended that the mem is a unit of information residing in the brain and is the mutating replicator in human cultural evolution. It is a pattern that can influence its surroundings that is, it has causal agency and can propagate. This created great debate among sociologists, biologists, and scientists of other disciplines, because Dawkins himself did not provide a sufficient explanation of how the replication of units of information in the brain controls human behavior and ultimately culture, since the principal topic of the book was genetics. Dawkins apparently did not intend to present a comprehensive theory of mimetics in The Selfish Gene, but rather coined the term mem in a speculative spirit. Accordingly, the term unit of information came to be defined in different ways by many scientists. The modern mimetics movement dates from the mid-1980s. A January 1983 Meta-Magical Themes column by Douglas Hofstadter, in Scientific American, was influential as was his 1985 book of the same name. Mimeticist was coined as analogous to geneticist originally in The Selfish Gene. Later Errol Lucas suggested that the discipline that studies mems and their connections to human and other carriers of them be known as mimetics by analogy with genetics. Dawkins' The Selfish Gene has been a factor in drawing in people of disparate intellectual backgrounds. Another stimulus was the publication in 1991 of Consciousness Explained by Tufts University philosopher Daniel Dennett, which incorporated the mem concept into a theory of the mind. In his 1991 essay Viruses of the Mind, Richard Dawkins used mimetics to explain the phenomenon of religious belief and the various characteristics of organized religions. By then, mimetics had also become a theme appearing in fiction. The idea of language as a virus had already been introduced by William S. Burroughs as early as 1962 in his book The Ticket That Exploded, and later in The Electronic Revolution, published in 1970, and the Job and is also explored in Media Virus by Douglas Rushkoff in 1995. However, the foundation of mimetics in full modern incarnation originates in the publication in 1996 of two books by authors outside the academic mainstream, Virus of the Mind, The New Science of the Mem by former Microsoft executive turned motivational speaker and professional poker player, Richard Brody, and Thought Contagion, How Belief Spreads Through Society by Aaron Lynch, a mathematician and philosopher who worked for many years as an engineer at Fermilab. Lynch claimed to have conceived his theory totally independently of any contact with academics in the cultural evolutionary sphere, and apparently was not even aware of Dawkins' The Selfish Gene until his book was very close to publication. Around the same time as the publication of the books by Lynch and Brody, the e-journal Journal of Mimetics, Evolutionary Models of Information Transmission appeared on the web. It was first hosted by the Centre for Policy Modelling at Manchester Metropolitan University but later taken over by Francis Helligan of the CLEA Research Institute at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. The e-journal soon became the central point for publication and debate within the nascent Mimeticist community. In 1999, Susan Blackmore, a psychologist at the University of the West of England, published The Meme Machine, which more fully worked out the ideas of Dennett, Lynch, and Brodie and attempted to compare and contrast them with various approaches from the cultural evolutionary mainstream, as well as providing novel, and controversial, memetics-based theories for the evolution of language and the human sense of individual selfhood. The term meme derives from the ancient Greek I to the first I registered trademark I, meaning imitator, pretender. The similar term meme was used in 1904, by the German evolutionary biologist Richard Semon, best known for his development of the Ingram theory of memory, in his work Die Mnemische Empfindungen in Ihren Beziehungen zu den originally Empfindungen, translated into English in 1921 as the meme. Until Daniel Schacter published Forgotten Ideas, Neglected Pioneers, Richard Semon and A Story of Memory in 2000, Semon's work had little influence, though it was quoted extensively in Erwin Schröer paragraph Dinger unregistered trademark S prescient 1956 Tanner Lecture OE Mind and Matter Richard Dawkins apparently coined the word meme independently of Semon, writing this. OE meme comes from a suitable Greek root, but I want a monosyllable that sounds a bit like a euro. I hope my classicist friends will forgive me if I abbreviate meme to mem. If it is any consolation, it could alternatively be thought of as being related to a euro or a meme or a euro, or to the French word marmi. Maturity. In 2005, the Journal of Mimetics Evolutionary Models of Information Transmission ceased publication and published a set of articles on the future of mimetics. The website states that although there was to be a relaunch, after several years nothing has happened. Susan Blackmore has left the University of the West of England to become a freelance science writer and now concentrates more on the field of consciousness and cognitive science. Derek Gatherer moved to work as a computer programmer in the pharmaceutical industry, although he still occasionally publishes on memetics-related matters. Richard Brodie is now climbing the world professional poker rankings. Aaron Lynch disowned the memetics community in the words mem and memetics, adopting the self-description thought contagionist. Lynch lost his previous funding from a private sponsor and after his book royalties declined, he was unable to support himself as a private memetics thought contagion consultant. He died in 2005. Susan Blackmore restated the definition of mem as, whatever is copied from one person to another person, whether habits, skills, songs, stories, or any other kind of information. Further she said that memes, like genes, are replicators in the sense as defined by Dawkins. That is, they are information that is copied. Memes are copied by imitation, teaching and other methods. The copies are not perfect, memes are copied with variation. Moreover, they compete for space in our memories and for the chance to be copied again. Only some of the variants can survive. The combination of these three elements forms precisely the condition for Darwinian evolution, and so memes evolve. Large groups of memes that are copied and passed on together are called co-adapted meme complexes, or memplexes. In her definition, the way that a meme replicates is through imitation. This requires brain capacity to generally imitate a model or selectively imitate the model. Since the process of social learning varies from one person to another, the imitation process cannot be said to be completely imitated. The sameness of an idea may be expressed with different memes supporting it. This is to say that the mutation rate in mimetic evolution is extremely high, and mutations are even possible within each and every interaction of the imitation process. It becomes very interesting when we see that a social system composed of a complex network of micro-interactions exists, but at the macro level an order emerges to create culture. Internalists and externalists, the Mimetics movement split almost immediately into two. The first group were those who wanted to stick to Dawkins' definition of a meme as a unit of cultural transmission. Gibran Berchiat, Another mimeticist responsible for helping to research and co-coin the term Mimetic Engineering, along with Levius Rolando and Larry Luttman, has stated that a meme can be defined, more precisely, as a unit of cultural information that can be copied, located in the brain. This thinking is more in line with Dawkins' second definition of the meme in his book The Extended Phenotype. The second group wants to redefine memes as observable cultural artifacts and behaviors. However, in contrast to those two positions, Blackmore does not reject either concept of external or internal memes. These two schools became known as the internalists and the externalists. Prominent internalists included both Lynch and Brodie. The most vocal externalists included Derek Gatherer, a geneticist from Liverpool John Moores University, and William Benzon, a writer on cultural evolution and music. The main rationale for externalism was that internal brain entities are not observable, and memetics cannot advance as a science, especially a quantitative science, unless it moves its emphasis onto the directly quantifiable aspects of culture. Internalists countered with various arguments, that brain states will eventually be directly observable with advanced technology, that most cultural anthropologists agree that culture is about beliefs and not artifacts, or that artifacts cannot be replicators in the same sense as mental entities are replicators. The debate became so heated that a 1998 symposium on memetics, organized as part of the 15th International Conference on Cybernetics, passed a motion calling for an end to definitional debates. McNamara demonstrated in 2011 that functional connectivity profiling using neuroimaging tools enables the observation of the processing of internal memes in response to external e-memes. An advanced statement of the internalist school came in 2002 with the publication of The Electric Meme, by Robert Unger, an anthropologist from the University of Cambridge. Unger also organized a conference in Cambridge in 1999, at which prominent sociologists and anthropologists were able to give their assessment of the progress made in memetics to that date. This resulted in the publication of Darwinizing Culture, The Status of Memetics as a Science, edited by Unger and with a foreword by Dennett, in 2000. Criticism. This evolutionary model of cultural information transfer is based on the concept that units of information, or memes, have an independent existence, are self-replicating, and are subject to selective evolution through environmental forces. Starting from a proposition put forward in the writings of Richard Dawkins, it has since turned into a new area of study, one that looks at the self-replicating units of culture. It has been proposed that just as memes are analogous to genes, memetics is analogous to genetics. Critics contend that some proponents' assertions are untested, unsupported or incorrect. Luis Benitez Babiesca, a critic of memetics, calls it a pseudo-scientific dogma, and a dangerous idea that poses a threat to the serious study of consciousness and cultural evolution among other things. As factual criticism, he refers to the lack of a code script for memes, as the DNA is for genes, and to the fact that the meme mutation mechanism is too unstable, which would render the evolutionary process chaotic. Another criticism comes from semiotics, stating that the concept of meme is a primitivized concept of sign. Meme is thus described in memetics as a sign without its triadic nature. In other words, meme is a degenerate sign, which includes only its ability of being copied. Accordingly, in the broadest sense, the objects of copying are memes, whereas the objects of translation and interpretation are signs. Mary Midgley criticizes memetics for at least two reasons. 1. Culture is not best understood by examining its smallest parts, as culture is pattern-like, comparable to an ocean current. Many more factors, historical and others, should be taken into account than only whatever particle culture is built from. 2. If memes are not thoughts, as Daniel C. Dennett insists in Darwin's dangerous idea, then their ontological status is open to question, and memeticists may be challenged whether memes even exist. Questions can extend to whether the idea of meme is itself a meme, or is a true concept. Fundamentally, memetics is an attempt to produce knowledge through organic metaphors, which as such is a questionable research approach, as the application of metaphors has the effect of hiding that which does not fit within the realm of the metaphor. Rather than study actual reality, Without preconceptions, Mimetics, as so many of the socio-biological explanations of society, believe that saying that the apple is like an orange is a valid analysis of the apple. Like other critics, Maria Konfeldner has criticized Mimetics for being based on an allegedly inaccurate analogy with a gene. Alternately, she claims it is heuristically trivial, being a mere redescription of what is already known without offering any useful novelty. New developments. Dawkins responds in A Devil's Chaplain that there are actually two different types of mimetic processes. The first is a type of cultural idea, action, or expression, which does have high variance. For instance, a student of his who had inherited some of the mannerisms of Wittgenstein. However, he also describes a self-correcting mem, highly resistant to mutation. As an example of this, he gives origami patterns in elementary schools except in rare cases, the mem is either passed on in the exact sequence of instructions, or terminates. This type of mem tends not to evolve, and to experience profound mutations in the rare event that it does. Another definition, given by Hockey Sitchinker, tried to offer a more rigorous formalism for the mem, complexes, and the deme, seeing the mem as a cultural unit in a cultural complex system. It is based on the Darwinian genetic algorithm with some modifications to account for the different patterns of evolution seen in genes and mems. In the method of Mimetics as the way to see culture as a complex adaptive system, he describes a way to see Mimetics as an alternative methodology of cultural evolution. However, there are as many possible definitions that are credited to the word mem. For example, in the sense of computer simulation, the term mimetic algorithm is used to define a particular computational viewpoint. The possibility of quantitative analysis of mems using neuroimaging tools and the suggestion that such studies have already been done was given by McNamara. This author proposes hyperscanning as a key tool in the future for investigating mimetics. In 2013, Australian academic J.T. Velikovsky proposed the Holon as the structure of the mem, synthesizing the major theories on mems of Richard Dawkins, Mielik Csikszentmihalyi, E.O. Wilson, Frederick Turner and Arthur Koestler. Mimetics can be simply understood as a method for scientific analysis of cultural evolution. However, proponents of mimetics as described in the Journal of Mimetics evolutionary models of information transmission believe that mimetics has the potential to be an important and promising analysis of culture using the framework of evolutionary concepts. Keith Henson, who wrote Mimetics and the Modular Mind, makes the case that mimetics needs to incorporate evolutionary psychology to understand the psychological traits of a mem's host. This is especially true of time-varying, mem amplification host traits, such as those leading to wars. Recently, Christopher D. Carlo has developed the idea of mimetic equilibrium to describe a cultural compatible state with biological equilibrium. In problem-solving and neurotransmission in the Upper Paleolithic, D. Carlo argues that as human consciousness evolved and developed, so too did our ancestors' capacity to consider and attempt to solve environmental problems in more conceptually sophisticated ways. Understood in this way, problem-solving amongst a particular group, when considered satisfactory, often produces a feeling of environmental control, stability, in short mimetic equilibrium. But the payoff is not merely practical, providing purely functional utility. It is biochemical, and it comes in the form of neurotransmitters. The relationship between a gradually emerging conscious awareness and sophisticated languages in which to formulate representations combined with the desire to maintain biological equilibrium, generated the necessity for mimetic equilibrium to fill in conceptual gaps in terms of understanding three very important aspects in the Upper Paleolithic: causality, morality, and mortality. The desire to explain phenomena in relation to maintaining survival and reproductive stasis, generated a normative stance in the minds of our ancestors. Survival reproductive value. Applications. Research methodologies that apply mimetics go by many names: viral marketing, cultural evolution, the history of ideas, social analytics, and more. Many of these applications do not make reference to the literature on memes directly but are built upon the evolutionary lens of idea propagation that treats semantic units of culture as self-replicating and mutating patterns of information that are assumed to be relevant for scientific study. For example, the field of public relations is filled with attempts to introduce new ideas and alter social discourse. One means of doing this is to design a meme and deploy it through various media channels. One historic example of applied memetics is the PR campaign conducted in 1991 as part of the build-up to the First Gulf War in the United States. The application of memetics to a difficult complex social system problem, environmental sustainability, has recently been attempted at think.org. Using meme types and memetic infection in several stock and flow simulation models, Jack Herrick has demonstrated several interesting phenomena that are best, and perhaps only, explained by memes. One model, the dueling loops of the political power place, argues that the fundamental reason corruption is the norm in politics is due to an inherent structural advantage of one feedback loop pitted against another. Another model, the mimetic evolution of solutions to difficult problems, uses memes, the evolutionary algorithm, and the scientific method to show how complex solutions evolve over time and how that process can be improved. The insights gained from these models are being used to engineer mimetic solution elements to the sustainability problem. Another application of memetics in the sustainability space is the crowdfunded climate meme project conducted by Joe Brewer and Balas Laszlo Karafiaoth in the spring of 2013. This study was based on a collection of 1,000 unique text-based expressions gathered from Twitter, Facebook, and structured interviews with climate activists. The major finding was that the global warming meme is not effective at spreading because it causes emotional duress in the minds of people who learn about it. 5 central tensions were revealed in the discourse about climate change, each of which represents a resonance point through which dialogue can be engaged. The tensions were harmony-disharmony, survival-extinction, cooperation-conflict, momentum-hesitation, and elitism-heretic, a general sentiment that each side of the debate considers the experts of its opposition to be untrustworthy. Ben Cullen, in his book Contagious Ideas, brought the idea of the meme into the discipline of archaeology. He coined the term cultural virus theory, and used it to try to anchor archaeological theory in a neo-Darwinian paradigm. Archaeological memetics could assist the application of the meme concept to material culture in particular. Francis Helligan of the Centre Leo Apostle for Interdisciplinary Studies has postulated what he calls mimetic selection criteria. These criteria opened the way to a specialized field of applied memetics to find out if these selection criteria could stand the test of quantitative analyses. In 2003, Klaus Chelins carried out these tests in a master's thesis project on the testability of the selection criteria. In Selfish Sounds and Linguistic Evolution, Austrian linguist Nikolaus Ritt has attempted to operationalize mimetic concepts and use them for the explanation of long-term sound changes and change conspiracies in early English. It is argued that a generalized Darwinian framework for handling cultural change can provide explanations where established, speaker-centered approaches fail to do so. The book makes comparatively concrete suggestions about the possible material structure of memes, and provides 2 empirically rich case studies. Australian academic S. J. Whitty has argued that project management is complex with the language and stories of its practitioners at its core. This radical approach sees a project and its management as an illusion. A human construct about a collection of feelings, expectations, and sensations, which are created, fashioned, and labeled by the human brain. Whitty's approach requires project managers to consider that the reasons for using project management are not consciously driven to maximize profit, and are encouraged to consider project management as naturally occurring, self-serving, evolving process which shapes organizations for its own purpose. Swedish political scientist Michael Sandberg argues against Lamarckian interpretations of institutional and technological evolution and studies creative innovation of information technologies in governmental and private organizations in Sweden in the 1990s from a mimetic perspective. Comparing the effects of active IT strategy versus user-producer interactivity, Evidence from Swedish organizations shows that co-evolutionary interactivity is almost 4 times as strong a factor behind IT creativity as the Lamarckian IT strategy. Terminology: Memplex is a collection or grouping of mems that have evolved into a mutually supportive or symbiotic relationship. Simply put, a mem complex is a set of ideas that reinforce each other. Mem complexes are roughly analogous to the symbiotic collection of individual genes that make up the genetic codes of biological organisms. An example of a memplex would be a religion. Mempool a population of interbreeding mems. Mimetic Engineering the process of deliberately creating mems, using engineering principles. Mimetic algorithms, an approach to evolutionary computation that attempts to emulate cultural evolution in order to solve optimization problems. Memotype is the actual information content of a mem. Memoid is a neologism for people who have been taken over by a mem to the extent that their own survival becomes inconsequential. Examples include kamikazes, suicide bombers and cult members who commit mass suicide. The term was apparently coined by H. Keith Henson in Mems, L5 and the Religion of the Space Colonies, L5 News, September 1985 ppA 5 €8, and referenced in the expanded second edition of Richard Dawkins' book The Selfish Gene. But in the strict sense all people are essentially memoid, since no distinction can be made if one uses language, or mems use their host. In The Electronic Revolution William S. Burroughs writes, the word has not been recognized as a virus because it has achieved a state of stable symbiosis with the host. Mimetic Equilibrium refers to the cultural equivalent of species biological equilibrium. It is that which humans strive for in terms of personal value with respect to cultural artifacts and ideas. The term was coined by Christopher D. Carlo. See also, Notes, Berman, J.T. The Misunderstanding of Mems, Biography of an Unscientific Object, 1976 1999. Perspectives on Science, 20, 1, 75-104. 1, doi, 10.1162/POSCA00057, Kantorovich, A Heron An Evolutionary View of Science, Imitation and Memetics. Google Groups, About All Memeticsgroups.google.com. 2012. Retrieved February 15, 2012. Index to all Joe M. Emmet issues. Journal of Mimetics. Retrieved October 27, 2009. Meta Magical Themas, Questing for the Google Books. Books.google.com April 4, 1996. ISBN A978-0-465-04566-2. Retrieved February 18, 2010. Meta Magical Themas, Questing for the Google Books. Books.google.com April 4, 1996. ISBN A978-0-465-04566-2. Retrieved February 18, 2010. Viruses of the Mind. cscs.umich.edu. Retrieved February 18, 2010. Journal of Ideas, Announcement and Call for Papers, Journal of Mimetics, Evolutionary Models of Information Transmission. Journal of Mimetics. Retrieved September 17, 2010. Dawkins, R. Replicators and Vehicles King's College Sociobiology Group, eds. Current Problems in Sociobiology, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, ppA 45 €64. A replicator may be defined as any entity in the universe of which copies are made. Blackmore, Susan. Consciousness in Mem Machines. Journal of Consciousness Studies A. B. McNamara, Adam. Can we measure MEMS? Frontiers in Evolutionary Neuroscience 3A, A.B. James W. Pelicak, MEMS as Pseudoscience, in Michael Schimmer, Skeptic Encyclopedia of Pseudoscience pages 664f. Benitez Barbiesca, Luis, Mimetics A Dangerous Idea. Intersietia 26, 29 €31, pages 29. Terence Deacon, The Trouble with Mems. The Semiotic Review of Books 10, 3. Kalevi Kull, Copy versus Translate, Mem versus Sign, Development of Biological Textuality. European Journal for Semiotic Studies 12, 1, 101 Euro 120. Midgley, Mary. The Solitary Self, Darwin and a Selfish Gene. Acumen, 2010. ISBN 978-1-84465-253-2, Stepan, Nancy L. Race and Gender, The Role of Analogy in Science. In Goldberg, David Theo. The Anatomy of Racism. University of Minnesota Press, 1990. Koflugner, Maria. 2, Darwinian Creativity and Mimetics. Acumen, 2011. Holonic Structure of the Mem, the Unit of Culture. Storyality Academic Weblog, J.T. Velikovsky. Retrieved January 2, 2014. Journal of Mimetics. Retrieved March 10, 2014. Keith Henson. View profile. More options. Promise Keepers, Is It a Cult? Alt Mind Control. Google Groups. Groups. Google Car. Retrieved February 18, 2010. Sex, Drugs, and Cults by H. Keith Henson. Human-Nature.com. Retrieved February 18, 2010. Evolutionary Psychology, Memes and the Origin of War. Mankindquarterly.org. December 19, 1996. Retrieved February 18, 2010. Evolutionary Psychology, Memes and the Origin of War. Cur05in.org. Cur05in.org. Retrieved February 18, 2010. Peer Watch, Using Memes to Improve Climate Change Communication, Cullen, Ben. Contagious Ideas, on Evolution, Culture, Archaeology, and Cultural Virus Theory. Oxford and Oakville, Oxbow Books. ISBN A1-84217-014-7. Ritt, Nikolaus. Selfish Sounds and Linguistic Evolution, A Darwinian Approach to Language Change. New York, Cambridge University Press. ISBN A978-0-521-82671-6. A Mimetic Paradigm of Project Management 575-583, The Evolution of IT Innovations in Swedish Organizations, A Darwinian Critique of a Lamarckiana Unregistered Trademark. Institutional Economics, Journal of Evolutionary Economics, Volume 17, No. 1, Blackmore, Susan, 1999, The Meme Machine, Oxford University Press, Oxford, ISBN 0-19-850365-2, Glenn Grant. A Mimetic Lexicon. Montreal. 1990, Two Early Mem Papers of Historical Interest, Christopher W. D. Carlo. How problem-solving and neurotransmission in the Upper Paleolithic led to the emergence and maintenance of mimetic equilibrium in contemporary world religions. Politics and Culture, references, Boyd, Robert and Richardson, Peter J. Culture and the Evolutionary Process. Chicago University Press. ISBN 978-0-226-06933-3, Boyd, Rob and Richardson, Peter J. Not by Genes Alone, How Culture Transformed Human Evolution. Chicago University Press. ISBN 0-226-71284-2, Cloak, F.T. 1975. Is a Cultural Ethology Possible? Human Ecology 3, 161 Euro 182. Helligan F. and Schilens K. Evolution of Culture, Mimetics, in Encyclopedia of Complexity and Systems Science, ed. B. Mayers, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, Oxford University Press, 1976, 2nd edition, December 1989, hardcover, 352 pages, ISBN 0-19-217773-7. April 1992, ISBN 0-19-857519-X. Trade paperback, September 1990, 352 pages, ISBN 0-19-286092-5. Ulmer, Robert. The Electric Mem, A New Theory of How We Think. New York, Free Press, 2002. ISBN 978-0-7432-0150-6, The Mem Machine by Susan Blackmore, Oxford University Press, 1999, hardcover ISBN 0-19-850,365-2, trade paperback ISBN 0-9658817-8, May 2000, ISBN 0-19-286212-X, The Ideology of Cybernetic Totalist Intellectuals, an essay by Jaron Lanier which is very strongly critical of mem totalists, who assert mems over bodies. Culture as Complex Adaptive System by Hockey Sich and Kira. Formal interplays between memetics and cultural analysis. Journal of Memetics Evolutionary Models of Information Transmission, Brody, Richard. Virus of the Mind, The New Science of the Mem. Seattle, Washington, Integral Press, 1996. ISBN 978-0-9636001-1-0, Cultural Software, A Theory of Ideology by Jack Balkin which uses memetics to explain the growth and spread of ideology. Can We Measure Mems? By Adam McNamara which presents neuroimaging tools to measure mems. Convivere con la Memetica by Francesco Sumigli, 2011 Lulu.com, external links. Memetics publications on the web.